Pulled into Tech Garage today, and the Sable's sitting here in the parking lot with a note. Looks like my wife's friend Chris went out from the grocery store and her car wouldn't start. Takes 3 things for a car to run: spark, fuel, and compression. Let's see what this one sounds like. Well, it sounds like it has compression, so we're going to have to chase spark and fuel. And you can watch us make Sable able today on Tech Garage. Welcome to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now, our family sedan won't start. Let's clarify: won't crank and won't start. Crank, I'm thinking batteries, starters, alternators, nothing going on. Start, on the other hand, nothing happened. And that's what's going on here, Brian. That's a problem.
Absolutely no fun. It's happened to all of us, but you know, it could be so many different things. So we're going to follow a few diagnostic steps here and do them really right to make sure we understand exactly what's wrong.
Well, it looks like you're underway. You got it under control. I'm going to head over and set up a demo so you can see how a fuel system actually works.
Well, step one is to determine, do we have spark? That can be done with any type of spark tester. This one makes it very, very simple. Chase is kind enough to be in the cab and help us out here. We get connection on any one of the spark plug boots. Right here, we get a good ground connection. Make sure you got your safety goggles on. And Chase, go ahead and crank it up and let's see if we've got spark. Well, there's good spark. You can see the fire jumping across right there. So I can assume we've got spark going to all cylinders. I'm going to reconnect this. And the next step is to check for fuel pressure. Now, a couple tips and tricks along the way. Make sure that's seated. Many of today's vehicles have a Schrader valve on the fuel rail. Now, there's also a check valve down at the fuel pump, which means inside this fuel rail, there's always pressure, right around 40 psi. So with the Schrader valve exposed, it looks just like a tire pressure valve if you haven't seen them before. You can take a screwdriver, anything, and push in on the valve, and you ought to see fuel come out of that system because, again, there's pressure in there. So when I push in, I've got nothing. It's not burping any fuel out. It's not seeping anything out at all. That's a hint. I think we've got a fuel delivery or fuel pressure problem. We're going to check that formally here in just a few minutes. Now, another way to check it is the way the professionals do, a proper fuel pressure gauge. Very simple how it connects onto the Schrader valve. Make sure you've got a good connection that's seated properly. That's really important. The pressure connector clicks on, and we're good. And once again, everything's clear. When Chase cranks it, we ought to see fuel pressure right here on the gauge. Go ahead and try it, Chase. We've got nothing. We've got no fuel pressure at all. And he cranked it long enough that that pump would have recovered and fuel would have come up to the rail, and we should see some pressure here. Now, I think we've got a fuel pressure problem. We've talked about that. For you driveway kind of DIYers out there that don't have the fancy fuel pressure gauge, there's another test you can do. Again, do this safely, but think intake manifold, think intake, air intake here. There's plenty of places for you to plug in. We're not getting fuel up to there, but I want to see if this vehicle wants to run. We think we have enough air, we think we have enough spark, but what about fuel? So throttle body cleaner, carbon choke cleaner, anything like that, spray it in for a couple seconds, get a charge in there. We'll have Chase crank it and see if the vehicle will run. 1, 2, 3, that should be enough. Seal it back up. Chase, go ahead and try it. Let's see if it runs. There you go. This vehicle wants to run. So clearly, we've now defined that we've got fuel delivery, fuel pressure problem that we've got to solve. So one more step along the way to check it out and see what's wrong. But John, he's going to explain exactly how this whole fuel system works.
Now, the fuel pump over in our Sable is real similar to this one right here. You can see the fuel pump located down here in the fuel tank. That's where it is, inside of the fuel tank. Then what happens is you come up here with a fuel line that comes to a fuel rail. Now, our fuel rail returns back to the tank. But see, on the exit of the fuel rail, you have a fuel pressure regulator. Why do you have a fuel pressure regulator? Well, if you're at idle, you don't need much fuel. 90% of it's going to return down to the tank. If you're at wide open throttle, it's going to close, it's going to back up fuel pressure, and you're going to get more fuel pressure when you need it. Now, once I have fuel pressure here, it's going to come up here, it's going to go through the lines, through the injector, into your engine. I can turn it on. You can see it actually pumping, and 90% of it's just returning right here because I don't have the injector on, so it's going to return. That helps stop vapor lock on your cars. You guys probably remember back in the carburation days, you may have a fuel pump that looks like this, bolts to the side of your block, 3 to 5 psi of pressure. This one here looks identical, but be careful. This could be a throttle body injection. It could be anywhere from 13 to 15 psi. Our fuel injection system's pushing anywhere from 45 to 50. Well, we got one test left, and we got to make sure we have voltage down at the pump. I think Brian's got it done.
Remember, we had no pressure at the fuel rail, so the final step is to see if we've got electrical power coming back here to the fuel pump. So I've located the hot wire coming to the fuel pump. I'm going to use a positive lead to connect to with the DVOM. And Chase, when he turns it over, we ought to see close to 12 volts coming here on our meter. Chase, go ahead and crank it. Well, we've got 12 volts coming back here. We need to replace the fuel pump. We're going to do that when we come back, so stay tuned for more Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts.
Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Holley, the undisputed leader in fuel systems for over 100 years. Dustless Blasting, the future of surface preparation. Evaporust, super safe rust remover. And by Advance Auto Parts, let's get you back on the road.
Well, you might notice something missing in that shot. Yep, it's the fuel tank. We got it out and it's on the table during the commercial break. Welcome back to Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts. Here it is. Wasn't really even that tough. We had a couple of straps holding it in. We had a big trans jack to get it down. A few evap lines, couple connections, 2 fuel lines, nothing to it. Now we just got to remove the fuel pump unit. But before we do that, Brian, you have a few tips.
You know, if you're working in your driveway and doing a project like this by yourself, chances are you're going to use your floor jack to lower that tank down out. Remove the straps, loosen them slowly, and be methodical and lower that down. The other thing you want to do on a metal tank like this is on top of your floor jack, between it and the tank, put a piece of cardboard. You want no metal-to-metal contact in case it would shift or slide. You don't want any chance for spark. Just like when it comes time to take that ring off the top, you got to use a brass punch, a brass hammer, whatever you have to not create any type of spark here at the top of the tank.
Now hang on to that, I'm going to use that. But before we pull this out, our fuel tank's located right here, and this is our actual whole pump and sending unit as one. I like to take a little compressed air, blow it off, just make sure you don't get any dirt that's going to flow down in the tank. We're going to clean it out anyway. But then you come over and you just take the actual brass and the punch, and you got a ring right here. I'm just going to kind of tap it around, and as I work this ring around, eventually it's going to pop off of here, and then when it pops off of here like that, we can go ahead and get the fuel pump unit out. Now, bear in mind, this car's got a lot of miles and there's a lot of dirt and debris, so you may have to work this thing out of there a little bit. I got a screwdriver maybe stuck on the seal. There it goes. Be careful those sparks, remember that, okay? And then you can see here as I pull this out, man, this thing is...
Oh yeah, look at that.
Yep, here we go.
That is a rough environment.
Be careful with the float. I'm going to put it over here in this bin right here so we can kind of hang on to it. Got a little bit of gas here. I'm going to soak that up. All right.
Great. I mean, I tell you what I love about the CarQuest fuel pump, John, is it comes with all of the components we need, from the new connectors, new wiring harness, all in great shape. Not too many, not too few, perfect OE fit, as well as the sock down here at the bottom. Now, this thing has a big job. There's a lot of contamination and dirt, as you'll see in a minute, inside any fuel tank, and this takes the brunt of it all. So it's all ready to go. All I have to do is just install the float, which goes on very simply.
I'll hold it here for you.
Thank you. And we slip it down in. There's great directions with this too, but it's so easy. It's in. There's our float, ready to travel. And of course, there's a new O-ring. That's big. That doesn't just keep the fuel from leaking out of the top of the mount, fumes as well. So we've got everything we need to get this thing in good shape. Now, down inside the tank, I mentioned that's the hostile environment. So I'm going to take the phone here and try to show you down inside the tank what we've got. It's hard to see in there. There's a little bit of light. It actually doesn't look too bad. There's a lot of oxidation, a lot of dirt. So I don't think we have to have this one professionally cleaned. I think we're probably okay.
We're in good shape, but you know, that's not a bad idea. Whether to drain the fuel, look in there, make sure. A lot of times these fuel pumps fail with debris. It's going to cause an amp draw. We'll see that a little later. Now I want to be careful with the float, so I'm going to put the float in, and then go ahead and put the sock in there, make sure it's all right. And then really all I need to do now is just make sure everything's in there. I'll get the O-ring put back in its place, and then just reverse the procedure. Seal it down, put your ring on, and lock it. Make sure it's sealed. Check it for any leaks. Now, this one wasn't too bad, but right here, boy, I pulled this one out a while ago, Brian.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, this thing is a really good look. You can see right here inside, it's all deteriorated.
Oh, yeah.
The varnish right here, I mean, this thing's shot. This is causing some big time problems, drivability problems, along with fuel delivery.
I'll tell you what, I think the Sable will be able after this project, and I'm excited to see how it runs.
Well, you know what? We'll wrap this up. We'll get it back in. Well, folks, the moment of truth. Did we make Sable able or not? Now, what we should see here when we crank it up, if it's working properly, is we should see flow. The flow gauge should start to come up here with fuel, and then our pressure should increase. Now, with this fuel injection here, with multi-port injection, we should see anywhere from 40 to about 60 PSI.
Anywhere in there.
I hope so, and if we don't, I'm going to blame it on you anyway.
Okay.
Give it a crank.
Nice.
Look at that, flow coming up. Here comes our pressure.
Nice.
Our pressure's building, and we are in. We are
Nice.
in. All right, awesome, great job.
Nice.
All right, just that easy. Hey, stick around. You know we're gonna pull in our Project RSX Resurrection, and we're gonna upgrade it with some new fuel injectors. Right after this break, we'll be back with more Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts. Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Well, we got our Project RSX Resurrection back in the shop, and let me tell you, driving it in here was a dream. Brian did a great job on those brakes, man. Those drills and solid rotors really did the job. It's stopping great. Now it's time to address the actual engine and our fuel systems, and oh boy, this is gonna need a little help. I mean, you can see right here some of the grease and some of the things that's going on. We'll go ahead and upgrade the fuel system. We'll start with the injectors here, and that's an important piece of the car because the fuel has to get into the engine, and in the future I probably see some headers and exhaust going on it. Now Brian's got his hands full, but he's gonna go ahead and get started on these injectors. And while he does, let's take a look at some injectors and some tests that will help you even out in the driveway. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go ahead and start up the system. And when I start up the system, you can actually see here, the injectors are pulsing. The computer's telling them to pulse, fuel's flowing through them, but this one, not so much. So what's going on here is what we suspect is probably going on with our Acura because of the fuel tank and everything else. It's gonna not spray too well. Now, a good illustration of that is you can see on the graphic, the far left of the screen is a good spray pattern. As you go through the middle of the screen, well, they're offset. They're not spraying too well. And the last one there is just dripping. It's not working at all. We can look at a couple of tests. The first one's real simple. You can just check it for ohms of resistance. You got a DVOM. You can go out right in your driveway and do this. I'm just going to go ahead and unplug these injectors and spin them around so you can see what we're doing. And we're just simply going to go across them. There's a wire windings in here, and they have an ohmic value. So we can go across there, and you can actually see the meter. This one's running about 12.6 ohms of resistance, and this one's running about 12.6, 12.5. Well, that doesn't explain the spraying not good, so we're gonna have to take it a little bit further. Check your service manual. Every injector's a little bit different. But see, we can run a flow test. That's pretty cool because we can actually see if the fuel is going through there or not. I put my fuel gauge up here, I connected it to the Schrader valve. And when I connect it to the Schrader valve, it's actually reading fuel pressure. Now I can turn it on, I can take the fuel pressure all the way up, and then it's gonna sit still. What I have here is a computer simulator. The simulator is actually gonna simulate the computer and pulse the injector. Now watch this, I'm gonna put it on this injector. You may hear it pulse a little bit, but watch the gauge. When I push the button and I hit it, it's pulsing, and the gauge just barely moved. Well, what does that tell me? Sit tight a minute. I'm gonna go to the next one. When I go to the next one, I'm gonna go ahead. You wanna bring it back up to every one of them, back to the same spot. Now, watch the difference. When I push this one, see that gauge drop? Well, that's the fuel pressure dropping. Why? It went through the injector and into the engine. So you can go through each one of the injectors and run that flow test. Now, I suspect our RSX, it has some injector problems. I'm sure Brian's tackling it right now.
Well, sure enough, we have our fuel rail just about off on the RSX. 2 mounting bolts here on the front, very simple to deal with. There's a grounding strap back here. There's a bracket bolt, it's out. That's just for the linkage cables. That's out. Now you have to disconnect the electrical connector at each fuel injector. Twin tabs, press them in, pull it up. Now if you're working on a V8, you might want to label these so you can keep really good track of them, but frankly on the 4-cylinder here, we got a lot of room and they're coming up off very simply. And we're ready to encourage this rail to come up. And you may need a big screwdriver, a small pry bar, just give it a little encouragement. That one came up very nicely. We're going to work it up out of here so we get access to our injectors. So, work it out. Patience is a virtue here. And there we go. And you know, by looking at it, you wouldn't really know that you've got a problem. But obviously, we've got a performance issue in that cylinder, and you got to keep in mind, think of that spray pattern we just saw. In a 4-cylinder motor, when you've got one cylinder performing that way in terms of fuel delivery, you're down at least 25% of your power. So that's a really big deal. So I like to make sure everything's clean here and replace these one at a time, backing any kind of dirt or contamination away from the hole. And then we've got our BWD replacement injectors. These are OE, but they're brand new. Everything, the pintle valve, everything is in great shape with these. And a little tip is these O-rings, you want to give them a little bit of lubrication going back down in so you don't fight this and take a chance on breaking it. What works really well for that? Dielectric gel. It's non-corrosive, it's not going to eat up any of these rubber O-rings. I'm pretty conservative with it, but I definitely want some on here to help our cause. 3 rubber O-rings, top, middle, bottom. Get it coated, work it around. Hands are clean, no dirt and contamination getting in there. Now we're going to install it back up into the fuel rail just like it came out, connector facing up. And we're going to follow this procedure across the other 4. You can kind of feel it and hear it pop in. Okay, we're installed and back in the rail. We'll repeat the procedure across the other 3 injectors, and this thing's going to be running like a champ. Now, if you want to see how the big boys do it and flow a lot of fuel, we'll join John in a minute over at Bernie's Speed Shop to see how they do it. But stay with us. More Tech Garage in a minute, presented by Advance Auto Parts.
Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Lund, premium style, lasting performance. Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. Clamp Tight, the clamp making tool. And by Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back on the road.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now, Performance Playbook this week's all about fuel systems. We made Sable able, but in order to make this A-fuel dragster able, it's going to take a lot of fuel. And it starts right here at the fuel tank. Runs down this massive pipe all the way back to the rear of the car, where we have to feed an estimated 4,000 horsepower. That takes a lot of fuel, and a special fuel. What kind of fuel do you use?
94% nitromethane and 6% alcohol.
And you also use a ton of it. I mean, tell me how much fuel you'll burn in 1/4 mile pass.
Roughly 6 gallons.
So a good analogy you told me, I mean, I'm dumping out a milk carton. By the time it empties, you burnt 6 gallons, went 1/4 mile. How fast?
We're trying to hit 285 mile an hour.
Now, how much does the fuel pump actually pump?
Right now we're between 50 and 60 gallons.
Wow, and you're trying to up that for more performance, obviously. The inlet's huge. You got to flow a ton of fuel. Now, Drew's back upgrading a fuel system to match the horsepower you guys built into a Mustang Cobra.
This is for our 93 Mustang. Came in as a GT. You have to upgrade the tank for the dual pumps because the factory tank doesn't accept the dual pumps. There's not enough room. This is a boosted application. They'll be getting a Pro Charger. So to meet the demand of the air, you got to meet the demand for the fuel. So we back it up, dual pumps. We got the tank, we got the pump set up and the wiring harness and everything from Advance Auto Parts. We replaced the factory hat with the billet hat. This accepts the dual pumps, the AN lines for the bigger lines to feed the fuel. Everything gets switched out, the sending unit gets switched out from factory. It's a good plug and play system. Drop the pumps in, put it in the tank, you're ready to rock and roll. Wiring harness is to meet the demand of the 2 pumps that the factory harness can't handle. This is all relayed thicker power wire, everything to feed the new system. Pulled all the lines off the old tank, cleaned them all up, blew them all out, capped off a few things we didn't need, replaced the grommet for the neck. Pretty much just try to make it all nice and new. We'll go through, drop the hat in it. You got the tank, you got the plastic bottom that goes on it. Put that in it. Tank straps up on it, cinch them down, and you're ready to rock. Expected about a 700 horsepower motor. We had to go through and do the injectors. The internals have already been done. We'll go through and put it on the dyno when we're done with it, do the fine tuning and everything like that, and get everything correct, the air and fuel correct. And it's overkill for what we need right now, but it's always good to have more than less.
That's the lowdown from Bernie's. Now it's time for the email question of the week.
John Savon from Phoenix emailed us this week. He has a 2015 Ford Fiesta that broke down. He ended up having to have it towed, got it back to the house. The car started back up and hasn't failed since. How do we get him started in the right direction?
Yeah, exactly. Sounds like a fuel pump issue. Now, Brian, fuel pumps are simple motors. I mean, here's one located right here. There's just windings and a magnet and an armature, and they can't touch. And a perfect example right here is our simple motor. So we're in the position right now where we're to the magnets, so we're really not going to get it to go. So what happened is maybe the tow truck came home, dropped it, jiggled it a little bit. If you give it a little kick, and there it goes, okay? So what happened? It got off the magnets and it starts to spin. Motors are really that simple. What causes that could be a fuel filter.
Certainly could be. If you have any kind of restriction in the fuel line, you're going to make that pump work harder than it was engineered and designed to. Here's a good look at a used fuel filter, a lot of dirt and contamination in there. Look how that compares to a brand new one. Clearly, the fuel pump pushing fuel through this filter would have to work harder and certainly draw more amps.
Perfect illustration for that is right here. We got a fuel pump right here. Here's the fuel filter. I'm going to simulate clogging it with this valve, and the return goes back to the tank, and we're going to measure the amps so we can actually see them go up. That's what's damaging the components. I'm going to turn this on here. You can see we're drawing about 4 amps, so I'm going to come over and close this. And when I close it, man, that thing's going up to 4.3, Brian, 4.4. I mean, just that quick. Think about that extra amp drawn. That's going to shorten the life. I mean, that's going to do some damage.
And I think that's what was going on in our Sable.
Exactly, and we got it all running now real good.
It's running great.
Hey, our RSX with those new injectors, running like a top.
We got brakes, we got power, that thing's awesome.
Well, check this out on Twitter or YouTube. We'll see you next week for more Tech Garage, where we get you back on the road.
Production assistance for Tech Garage is provided by Chipola College, located in Marianna, Florida. Founded in 1947, Chipola was recently ranked as one of the top 3 community colleges in the United States.